Welcome to AHG Connects, where voices, information, and resources are empowered intentionally.
I am so super stoked about this new partnership with Jonathan Fink and Silicon Curtain to I can't even express how much. He and I conversed some months ago, and it was genuine, and it was heartfelt, and it was intellectual, and it was of integrity, and it was about honor. How he explains the geopolitical arena that all of these players are a part of, from us to China to Russia, and how they're really playing a chess game.
Right.
And the smartest person wins. But he explains it to the point that I don't care who's listening can get it. So I'm just absolutely thrilled that he's going to have a programming show on fourth Wednesdays, and he's just going to talk intellectually about what's going on and the dangers of making sure that democracy does not fail, because we're living in some dangerous times right now.
Extremely.
So Jonathan, welcome to America's Heroes Group. And let me tell you guys how serious and dedicated he is. He's in England. It's 1 o'clock over there.
Oh,
So
it's past tea time.
Thank you, Jonathan.
1:30. 1:30 in the
1:30.
morning.
Excuse me, it's 1:30. Yes.
Yes, 1:30.
His schedule says 1:30.
Yeah.
And
Take it away, please.
I'm definitely having a lion tomorrow. That's for sure. Thank you for that generous introduction. That's absolutely fantastic. But yeah, I'd like to echo what you said. I mean, it's been clear to me that since 2016, Russia has been projecting its various methodologies to disrupt our information sphere, disrupt our democracies, and it started to get extremely aggressive in doing that. Whether we've picked up on it or not, this has been going on now for quite a number of years. One could argue decades even behind the scenes, but it's become far more explicit and overt since 2016. And I think it's going to go into a high gear. I think they are intent on not just disrupting the American political system and political process, they are intent on disrupting America, trying to bring down your democracy and trying to create division to the point where I think they would like to see open hostility on the streets of American cities. So I think this is a very serious situation. It's probably the only way they can win their completely misguided, brutal and illegal war in Ukraine is to cause division, dissent and conflict in other parts of the world.
Now, how does someone, Mr. Fink, how's it a nation like Russia doing that? We kind of saw a little bit when in Trump's first term when he was elected. You could see some of the negative campaign things on Facebook and social media. But what are the real tools that make that effective for a foreign country to come into a place like America and cause dissent?
I think a lot of this is conjecture, of course. We can't know absolutely everything for sure. But what they seem to be very good at is creating an extremely divisive atmosphere. They were able to surround Trump with people that had connections to Russia. One could come to the obvious conclusion, therefore, that these are all agents and Trump is a Russian agent, a Russian asset, all these kind of things. Or they could have placed these people around Trump to give that impression to weaponize the information environment. I'm not sure we'll ever know the full extent of the story, but that part of it worked. It completely turned the information news arena toxic. People would listen to their own partisan version of the news and wouldn't be open to conversations with anybody else with a different point of view. And I think what Glenda alluded to there is that on Silicon Curtain, I think we came to realize the podcast is now 2.5 years old. It was created shortly after Russia's full-scale war began. I think we started to realize that unless we created a a non-partisan space, a space where people of conservative sensibilities and Democrats could kind of come together and
Mm-hmm.
align and connect on certain issues,
Mm-hmm.
including the idea of maximizing freedom, including the idea of Ukrainian victory, including the idea that Russia is a malign actor and China doesn't necessarily have our best interests at heart. I realized that we'd have to create this kind of space if we were going to have any chance of resisting Russia's informational aggression.
Mm. So,
That's
Mr. Jonathan, the fact that Russia and North Korea has now come together to solidify their partnership. How dangerous is this in this geopolitical arena? I mean, it's frightening.
I mean, if you rewind 3 years and if you were to explain to someone what is going on now,
Hmm.
they would scarcely believe you. That British Storm Shadows were used to take out the headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. I mean, that's just a mind-boggling thing that's occurred there. The idea that we're going to have F-16s, hopefully, above the skies in Ukraine. Well, we'll come to
okay.
that. We'll come to that in a minute as well. But the idea that all this would be going on, the idea that North Korean soldiers, thousands, if not maybe tens of thousands of them, would be fighting on the territory of Europe. And let's face it, I mean, we might think that Ukraine is far away from the center of Europe. It's absolutely not. It is Central Europe. It's a European country. It's a democracy. It's a vibrant and very innovative society with huge potential to develop further. The idea that soldiers from the most repressive, the most barbaric regime on earth would be on the territory of Europe, trying to push autocracy westwards, barely conceivable. And yet here we are. And it seems that in the mainstream media, these things very quickly become normalized. And that's one of the disturbing aspects of it. The question for me is, this is where we're at. It was barely conceivable if you rewind a few years. The question is going to be, where are we going to be in 3 months' time? Where are we going to be in 6 months, 12 months, 9 months, 12 months? I think we're going to see extraordinary things happening that are barely conceivable even at this point in time.
And I think you touched on something really important, because with that conflict, that tide or that partnership that's going on between North Korea and Russia, but then you also have two distinctly different presidents and how they or candidates that have an approach to what's happening in Ukraine. If Trump gets in office, what do you see from? I'll let you speak on that. What do you see his approach might be as opposed to, say, a Biden presidency, or even or another Democrat if this comes to that?
So I've spoken to lots of people about this to try and not just inject my own prejudices into it, because I'm going to be completely frank. As entertaining as he may be sometimes, Trump is exceedingly dangerous
The game show
person.
host. What do you?
Yeah.
He's also extremely fluent, more fluent when he's actually, putting out falsehoods, when he's lying. And he's a very convincing liar for certain people who are in a certain sort of, information space. So he has a kind of competency there, but it's quite a dangerous one. So I tried to speak to a lot of people so that I wasn't, injecting my prejudices into it. And there's a range of opinion. I mean, a lot of the things he says are repeating Russian propaganda narratives. There's no getting away from that. But people who are his supporters will say, well, one, they may not recognize those as Russian narratives, but even if they do, they'll say, yeah, he's just saying that. He won't really do it. He won't disband NATO. He won't do this. He won't cut off funding to Ukraine, because that would be the wrong thing to do, and this is just posturing. So there's that point of view. There's a sort of pro-Trump people who make excuses for what he says. In his first time in office, it strikes me that he did an awful lot of what he said he would do.
Mhm.
So I think we have to take him at his word. We have to listen, and as unserious as he can be, I think we have to take his words quite seriously.
Mhm.
If we can pick those little little mozzarella balls out of the word salad that he tends to sort of throw out there. There are Other people who will say, well, hang on a second, he might start off by thinking he can end the war. But if he can't end it in 48 hours, he's going to get upset. He's going to feel personally slighted if Putin in any way humiliates him, and that may well happen very quickly. Then he may swing 360 degrees and say, okay, screw it, let's just give Ukraine everything they need. And he might do something precipitous, which would just destroy Russia, a little bit in the way that he launched that assassination of the Iranian general, when many people around would have said, look, that's extraordinary escalation, don't go there. And off he did, and he kind of went there and did it. Those are the sort of, I'd say, more optimistic scenarios, which is don't believe what he says, or he doesn't mean what he says, and things are going to change. Others, however, will say, look, this is extremely dangerous. He may well believe many of the narratives that he's clearly been surrounded by, and he may completely cut Ukraine off. He may think that by doing that, he'll be forcing Ukraine into an unfair or unjust peace on Russia's terms. But that is better than the war continuing. And there are certainly many people surrounding him, many advisors, who are agitating for exactly that policy. Someone he meets or has met recently, Viktor Orban, the sort of Tim Pot quasi-autocrat of Hungary. This is exactly the plan he signed up to. Cut Ukraine off, and let Russia do what it will with them. If that pauses the war on current lines, so be it. If Russia bites off big extra chunks of Ukraine, well, let the dice fall wherever they may. That is what I think the most likely scenario is. But as ever, Trump is not necessarily predictable. And we also know that his mind changes. His mind often changes depending on who is surrounding him. So that perhaps is the most important thing at the moment, is to say, okay, who is likely to be his team?
Yeah.
Is it going to be an adult? Because he was surrounded by some interesting and fairly serious people in the first term. Some of these suggested people that are going to be forming his government are rather less than serious. In fact, many of them seem to be deeply, deeply down various conspiratorial rabbit holes.
Yes. Yeah. One thing I have a question about is you have Xi Jinping in China. You have Kim Jong in North Korea. You have multiple autocracies throughout the world, even in South America, right? And so they seem to be congealing to some degree, where they're forming a mindset of what they want to do with the world. But even China has actually lost its productivity. It's gone down. Its economy has declined, and it seems that democracies flourish more. And the people actually, are going to respond at some point. When Adolf Hitler came into power, I drew a parallel between him and Trump in some degree, because he was with the brown shirts. He went to the grassroots people and said, you are being, destroyed and you're being suppressed. And that's why we had to raise the Third Reich, right? And this is the kind of thing that I see it playing out here. And so, do you think that the economy and people's will to do better, to be more prosperous, is going to push? Because the people are saying we want more prosperity, and we thought we had that before, but they really didn't, if we really look at the numbers. So how do you see that balance working out?
Well, that's a dangerous point, isn't it, when people have something and then are at risk of losing it? And I think in China, that could cause some serious problems. In Russia, the standard of living was better for many people in the larger cities before Putin started his military adventures. Probably the sort of high point of the economy was around sort of 2012. He invaded Georgia in 2008. That didn't really have any impact in terms of sanctions, because the West did nothing at all to impose any costs on him for that move. Then you had Crimea. Some sanctions were imposed. But again, there's no really major economic cost to that. It's only really with the full-scale war that he started to experience the sort of costs. But his people have not revolted. Those who are more likely to protest have either left the country or are terrified into silence. So it's unlikely that declining living standards will prompt any kind of change in Russia. But to your point about freedom, I mean, I think it's quite simple, and that is that people are not necessarily all evil in an autocracy, and they don't necessarily even believe that they're living in a system which is by definition evil. I think that's very difficult for people to face and to rationalize.
Mhm.
But what the autocrat therefore needs to do is to manipulate them, needs to lie and fabricate a reality to, make sure people don't just turn around and think, "Hang on a second." There's a British humorous sketch where two Nazi officers are chatting in a bar, I think it is, and one of them turns to the other and say, "Hang on a second, are we the bad guys?" Um, and autocrats have to maintain this illusion that they're people and not the bad guys, and they're not being lied to. And often the people will acquiesce in those lies. The trouble is when that system of lying becomes endemic, it means that people who acquiesce to lies get promoted in that system, and people who challenge lies don't. It's very much, I think, speaking to Mick Ryan, and I think Ben Hodges has made this point very forcefully on the channel, is that you need a feedback loop. If things are going wrong, if there's mistakes, you need to be able to express that and pass that up the command chain, because otherwise those mistakes will carry on being repeated. In an autocracy, every level of society starts to systematically lie and systematically create falsehoods, because telling truth to power means you lose your job, your car, your house, your privileges, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
And when you extrapolate that out across an entire economy, it's going to become, one, very inefficient. Two, it's going to build up all sorts of pressures which don't get addressed, and then rather than being addressed incrementally as they are in Western systems, we have our booms and busts, but they're almost like a pressure valve. You don't have that in autocracy. It all comes out in one horrible kind of oozy, pussy kind of mess. But also it stifles innovation. I think your point there was incredibly apt there. Societies that start to be sort of built on toadying and sycophancy and lies no longer are innovative and creative.
Oh, so you start taking Clorox to take care of COVID.
Oh my gosh.
So Mr. Fink, so how do you use your website, Silicon Curtain, to fight disinformation and misinformation?
It started 2.5 years ago. No subscribers. I'm absolutely nobody. No one knows me. I did study Russian back in the day, and I lived in Russia for a number of years in the 90s. So I have a certain sort of, I would say, background as a sort of semi-expert in that area. And so I just went onto Twitter, as it was then called. I went onto LinkedIn, and I just started to look at who is posting stuff about what's going on in Ukraine. And those people who I liked, those people who were making forceful points that I thought were politically partisan, I just thought, well, that'd be interesting to talk to that person. And so I'd reach out to them. I wouldn't go through intermediaries or secretaries or gatekeepers. I just reach out directly, find a way, get their contact details and say, hi, I'm creating this channel. Do you want to speak? I had no idea, it would end up here. But what it's built up to, and this is a long way around of answering your question, I realized that propaganda is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It also works. It works a little bit like, when you sort of go to church, and every week there's a certain sort of format, and there's a certain sort of rhythm and structure to the prayers, and everything that happens there. I'm not saying it's indoctrination, but repetition helps to remember detail. Repetition helps to condition, conformity to an extent.
That's right.
We have a certain party in America that's good at that.
propaganda works in the same way. It repeats itself over and over and over again. It takes the same lie or the same story and it puts it in different formats, different tones, different voices, and it just makes sure that gets amplified and
I think
repeated
they call
across
that
multiple.
subliminal. Am I correct, Jonathan? It's
It's
subliminal. It
it is
becomes
it's on every it is it's on every level. It's subliminal
Well,
and
yeah,
it's in your face and
yeah,
it's everywhere and at
right.
every level. Um,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people say, "Oh well, I know Russian propaganda, right? I know that. I'm not going to be fooled by that." What they really mean is, I've spotted some propaganda, and I've dealt with that. That doesn't mean they've spotted it all. It doesn't mean it's not getting through in more
no.
subtle ways. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do this channel, right, it has to be daily. I have to be putting out an episode every day, and I have to create because again, the first tools to counter propaganda were sort of fact checking, and it still exists and it's still got its role. But it turns out the fact checking doesn't work because what propaganda does is it builds an entire story, it builds an entire universe for you to inhabit. Whether that universe represents reality or not doesn't really matter. It's created somewhere for you to inhabit. And what fact checking does is it sort of plucks at the sort of foundations of that. But as with again religious belief, it's almost like all or nothing. Either you're going to take it and you're going to believe it, but you can't pick and choose. And when someone starts, like unpicking the thread of a jumper, very quickly the whole thing unravels. So you become very protective because, if it starts unraveling, that's your identity, that's your belief system, that's the whole world you've built for yourself. And propaganda does this. And like cultish beliefs as well, it inducts people sort of slowly. It brings them down various rabbit holes. But once it's created that reality, it's very difficult through fact checking to get someone out of it. So what my channel does is it creates an alternative reality for people to inhabit. One, I would hope, which has at least the intent of trying to reflect what's going on in the world. One that is hopefully fact-led. But what I realized is it's no good just pulling together a bunch of facts. What you have to create is a narrative, a story, a whole space for people to immerse themselves in and inhabit. And I get comments from quite a few of my audience and so on. About 35% of the audience is actually US based. Then we've got UK, Australia, Northern Europe, Baltics, etc. Quite a few Ukrainians tune in. So it's incredibly important, I think, that we've got this big US segment. And a lot of people write and say, oh, you know what, I just, I go out jogging every morning, I go cycling or whatever, and I just put the podcast on and it's now part of my routine. Well, this is ideal for me because I've created a world for them to inhabit, and it counters that alternative world of made up toxic stuff which Russia is trying to surround people with.
But not only Russia, America, because I'm finding so many people are tired of the rhetoric over here because it has become very negative and extremely dangerous if you disagree with how they believe and who they want to support. And so people are they don't feel the freedom anymore to express themselves politically in a intellectual conversation of, okay, we're going to disagree on how we're going to disagree and let it be civil. It's really dangerous now to tell people what you're thinking politically. It really is. And this is America.
Yeah.
And we pulled out of NATO, and we pulled out of the climate change accord, right? And so we're back in that, so Biden actually put us back on that stream. So what do you think the narrative needs to be, collective narrative for NATO and for the climate accord? Because right now we're seeing 120 degrees in Arizona. We're seeing a heat wave across. We're seeing we're going to go to 53 hurricanes instead of the normal 8 we have, in this climate season. And we haven't even started the climate season, which usually goes in August. So we're way ahead of the schedule. So those things are things that people are going to have to wake up to because it's causing deaths. It's causing destruction. And unless we change the course of that, we have leadership right now in power, globally, that are doing things that are going to destroy humanity if we don't act and we don't have the right narrative or the correct cultural perspective or place that you're talking about building.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? But I think we come back to this idea of innovation. What we need to get through what's going to be, I think, a difficult century is we need societies to be resilient. We need them, broad populations, to be able to understand digital information and think critically about it. And we need people to be able to engage in debates that, as you say, are non-partisan, because that will create the foundation for innovation. And it's my belief that looking at Ukraine provides an extraordinary example of this. Their government, for a long time, has been relatively dysfunctional. Their administration, their bureaucracy is sort of quite slow and clunky. It's changing, but Ukrainians are very resourceful people, and they look at their government and they think, yeah, that's fine. It's going to change at its own pace, but it's not going to solve these problems. So what do Ukrainians do? Well, they band together. They created a very vibrant civil society. They've created an extraordinarily vibrant tech sector,
Mhm.
and they've taken innovation into their own hands. That also means information resilience, fighting Russian propaganda, and so on. When Russia invaded in 2014, it wasn't the government and really the official army that prevented the country from being overrun. It was because what had happened is Russia had put its, Russia's puppet ruler was in charge,
Yeah.
and he'd fleeced the army. They'd actually sold off the equipment. They'd stolen it, sold it off legally and illegally. They'd wound it all down. There were no uniforms, no equipment, no medical supplies, no organization. Absolute disaster. So people
Wow.
stepped in. They
Yeah.
went to the front. They crowdsourced weapons and equipment. Actually, a big factor, and I know the US has
Oh,
only just legalized support for Azov.
right.
One of the first groups was football hooligans.
What, Jonathan, I hate to jump in and we're running out of
We're out
time.
of
So,
time.
yeah, so
Oh,
I am so thrilled
yes.
and so appreciative that you have trusted us with your platform, and you will be joining our show on fourth Wednesdays. So we're going
Yes.
to just really we're just going to really let it out there and let people listen and decide for themselves intellectually. This is some stuff here, and we need to listen to it. So welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to it.